The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete floor of the Fort Harrison Armory as Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez meticulously organized ammunition inventory sheets. Her calloused fingers moved with practiced efficiency, entering serial numbers into the computer system that had become her prison for the past 6 months. Around her, the familiar weight of M24 sniper rifles hung in their racks, their scopes catching the light like accusatory eyes. Each weapon seemed to mock her current assignment, a cruel reminder of the skills that had earned her 3 confirmed kills at distances exceeding 1,200 meters in Afghanistan, now reduced to nothing more than paperwork and supply requisitions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on her. 2 years ago, she had been the most feared marksman in the 75th Ranger Regiment, capable of threading a needle at distances that would make most soldiers dizzy just thinking about the mathematics involved. Now, thanks to a single moment of defiance against her commanding officer, she spent her days counting bullets instead of firing them, relegated to the administrative duties that the brass used as punishment for soldiers who dared to question orders. Colonel Marcus Webb had made his position crystal clear during her reassignment hearing. Insubordination, regardless of the circumstances, could not be tolerated in his command structure. The fact that her refusal to take an impossible shot had potentially saved civilian lives was irrelevant to him. Orders were orders, and soldiers who couldn't follow them had no place on the battlefield. So here she sat, surrounded by the tools of her trade, forbidden from using the one skill that had defined her entire military career. The sound of combat boots on concrete echoed through the armory as Captain James Morrison approached her desk. His uniform was pressed to perfection, every crease sharp enough to cut paper, but Elena could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Morrison was new to Fort Harrison, transferred in just 3 weeks ago to take over the base's counterintelligence operations, and he carried himself with the careful precision of an officer still trying to prove himself worthy of his position. Elena looked up from her spreadsheet, noting the manila folder clutched in Morrison's left hand, and the way his jaw tensed as he prepared to speak. She had seen that expression before, usually on the faces of officers who were about to deliver news that would change everything. Her instincts, honed by years of reading battlefield situations in milliseconds, told her that whatever was in that folder was going to pull her back into a world she thought she had been permanently exiled from. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez," Morrison said, his voice carrying the formal tone that officers used when they were operating outside their comfort zone. "I need to speak with you about a matter of utmost importance. What I'm about to show you is classified above your current security clearance, but recent developments have made your expertise essential to an ongoing investigation." Elena saved her work and closed the laptop, giving Morrison her full attention. She had learned long ago that when officers started talking about classified matters and essential expertise, it usually meant someone was either in serious trouble or about to be. Given her current status as the base's most overqualified filing clerk, she suspected she was about to find out which category she fell into. Morrison opened the folder and spread 3 photographs across her desk. The images showed a military compound from different angles, clearly taken by surveillance drones or satellites. Elena's trained eye immediately began analyzing the layout, noting the defensive positions, potential entry points, and sightlines that would be available to a marksman. Even after months of administrative exile, her mind automatically cataloged the tactical information with the same precision that had made her legendary among her peers. "This is Forward Operating Base Sentinel in the Kandahar province," Morrison explained, pointing to the largest photograph. 3 days ago, the base came under attack by what appeared to be a coordinated insurgent assault. The attack was repelled, but during the engagement, something unusual happened that has caught the attention of military intelligence. Elena studied the photographs more closely, noting burn marks and blast damage that indicated the use of sophisticated explosives. The attack pattern suggested military training, rather than the typical improvised tactics employed by local insurgent groups. Someone with access to advanced equipment and tactical knowledge had planned this operation, and that someone had specifically targeted areas of the base that would cause maximum disruption to communication and supply lines. What made this attack unusual? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The targeting was too precise, too well coordinated to be the work of ordinary insurgents. Someone with intimate knowledge of American military procedures had planned this assault, and that knowledge could only have come from inside sources. Morrison pulled out a fourth photograph, this one showing a section of the base's perimeter wall. Elena's breath caught as she saw what had captured the intelligence community's attention. 3 perfectly round holes had been punched through the concrete barrier, each one precisely placed to disable the base's external security cameras. The holes were too small to have been made by conventional explosives and too perfectly positioned to be coincidental. These holes were made by rifle fire, Morrison continued. Our ballistics experts estimate the shots came from a distance of approximately 1,500 meters, fired with surgical precision to knock out our surveillance capabilities without causing collateral damage to personnel or critical infrastructure. The shooter was good enough to thread these shots through gaps in our defensive perimeter that most marksmen couldn't even see, let alone hit. Elena felt a familiar stirring in her chest, the same sensation she had experienced every time she lined up a difficult shot downrange. Someone had accomplished what she would have considered a challenging but achievable task, and the military intelligence community was scrambling to understand who possessed that level of skill. The implications were troubling, not just because of the demonstrated marksmanship ability, but because of what it suggested about the enemy's knowledge of American defensive positions. Captain Morrison, Elena said carefully, I assume you're not showing me this just to admire someone else's shooting. What exactly do you need from me? Morrison's expression grew more serious as he pulled out a fifth photograph, this one showing a closer view of one of the holes. Elena leaned forward, her professional curiosity overriding her resentment at being pulled into active operations after months of administrative punishment. The hole was perfectly circular, showing no signs of the irregular damage typically associated with explosive penetration. This was definitely the work of a high-powered rifle, fired by someone with exceptional skill and intimate knowledge of the target. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, according to your service record, you're one of only 12 active-duty snipers in the entire U.S. military, capable of making shots at this distance with this level of precision. We need you to analyze these photographs and provide your professional assessment of what we're dealing with. More importantly, we need to know if this shooter might be planning additional attacks on American installations. Elena studied the photographs again, this time focusing on the technical aspects of the shots rather than the tactical implications. The angle of penetration suggested the shooter had been positioned on elevated terrain to the northwest of the base, probably using a high-powered rifle chambered in 338 Lapua Magnum or possibly 50 BMG. The precision required to make these shots in combat conditions indicated not just exceptional marksmanship skills, but also access to top-tier equipment and extensive training in long-range shooting techniques. Captain, based on these photographs, I can tell you several things about your shooter, Elena began, slipping back into the analytical mindset that had made her invaluable to special operations commanders. First, this person has military training, probably special forces or equivalent. The shot placement is too precise and the tactical thinking too sophisticated for a civilian marksman or typical insurgent. Second, they're using professional-grade equipment, probably a custom-built rifle system that costs more than most people make in a year. She paused, organizing her thoughts as Morrison took notes. The implications of what she was seeing were more serious than she had initially realized, and she wanted to make sure her assessment was as accurate as possible. Third, and most importantly, this shooter had detailed intelligence about our defensive positions and patrol schedules. These shots were timed perfectly to avoid our security sweeps, and the positions chosen suggest intimate knowledge of our surveillance coverage. Captain, I think you're dealing with either a rogue American operative or someone who has been extensively trained by American personnel. Morrison's face went pale as he processed the implications of Elena's assessment. The possibility of a rogue American sniper operating in theater was a nightmare scenario that would have repercussions throughout the military hierarchy. If an American-trained marksman was providing support to insurgent forces, it would represent a security breach of unprecedented magnitude. Staff Sergeant, I need to ask you directly, Morrison said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. In your professional opinion, how many people are capable of making shots like these? Elena considered the question carefully. The military sniper community was small and tightly knit, with most of the truly exceptional marksmen known to each other by reputation if not personal acquaintance. Someone with this level of skill would not have gone unnoticed during training or deployment, and their capabilities would have been documented in military records. Captain, If we're talking about active-duty American personnel, I can give you a list of names, Elena replied. There are maybe 20 people in the entire military who could make these shots under ideal conditions, and probably only 5 or 6 who could do it consistently in a combat environment. If one of them has gone rogue, we need to identify them immediately. Morrison closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, the weight of the investigation settling on his shoulders like a heavy pack. Elena could see him processing the information, trying to figure out how to pursue leads without alerting potential suspects or creating panic within the command structure. The delicate nature of investigating American personnel for treason required careful handling and absolute discretion. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, I'm going to be direct with you, Morrison said after a long pause. Your current assignment was a result of disciplinary action, but your expertise is essential to this investigation. I'm prepared to recommend your reinstatement to active sniper duties if you're willing to help us identify and locate this rogue marksman. Elena felt her pulse quicken at the prospect of returning to the work she loved, but years of military service had taught her to be cautious about offers that seemed too good to be true. Morrison was new to the base and might not fully understand the politics behind her reassignment, and she didn't want to create additional problems for herself by accepting an assignment that might be revoked once Colonel Webb learned about it. Captain Morrison, I appreciate the offer, but I need to point out that my reassignment to administrative duties was personally ordered by Colonel Webb. He's not going to be happy about having his disciplinary decisions overruled, especially not by an officer who's been here for less than a month. Morrison's expression hardened, and Elena could see him weighing his options. As a captain, he outranked her significantly, but Colonel Webb was his superior officer and had the authority to countermand any decisions Morrison made regarding personnel assignments. The politics of military hierarchy could be treacherous for officers who tried to circumvent established chains of command. Staff Sergeant, let me worry about Colonel Webb, Morrison said finally. This investigation has been classified as a matter of national security, which gives me certain authorities that supersede normal personnel procedures. Your expertise is not just helpful to this investigation, it's essential. Without someone who understands the technical aspects of long-range shooting, we're flying blind. Elena nodded, understanding that Morrison was taking a significant career risk by involving her in the investigation. If the operation went badly, or if Colonel Webb decided to make an issue of the personnel reassignment, Morrison could find himself facing the same kind of administrative punishment that had sidelined her own career. The fact that he was willing to take that risk suggested the investigation was more important than he had initially indicated. All right, Captain. I'm willing to help, but I need to understand exactly what you're asking me to do. Are we talking about a desk analysis of the photographs, or are you expecting me to get back into the field? Morrison opened the folder again and pulled out a map of the Kandahar province marked with several red circles indicating American military installations. Elena's stomach dropped as she saw the scope of what they were dealing with. The attack on Forward Operating Base Sentinel was just one of several incidents that had occurred over the past month, all showing similar patterns of precision marksmanship and insider knowledge. Staff Sergeant, we believe the rogue sniper is planning a coordinated campaign against American installations throughout the province. The attack on Sentinel was just the beginning. We need someone with your skills to help us predict where the next attack will occur and hopefully intercept the shooter before they can cause serious casualties. Elena studied the map, her mind automatically calculating distances, sight lines, and potential sniper positions around each marked installation. The pattern that emerged was troubling but predictable, showing a logical progression from smaller, less defended outposts to larger, more strategically important bases. If her analysis was correct, the shooter was building up to a major assault on one of the province's key command centers. Captain Morrison, based on this pattern, I think your shooter is working toward an attack on Camp Leatherneck or possibly Bagram Airfield. Those are the only targets in the area that would justify this kind of systematic approach. If I'm right, we're not just dealing with a rogue sniper. We're looking at someone who's trying to decapitate American command structure in the region. Morrison's face went ashen as he processed the implications of Elena's assessment. An attack on either of those installations would be catastrophic, not just in terms of casualties, but also in terms of the broader strategic situation in Afghanistan. The loss of key command personnel would create chaos throughout American operations in the region and potentially tip the balance of power toward insurgent forces. Staff Sergeant, how confident are you in that assessment? Elena traced the pattern of attacks on the map with her finger, noting the consistent northward progression and the increasing complexity of each operation. The shooter was clearly working from a detailed plan, probably developed over months of surveillance and intelligence gathering. The systematic nature of the campaign suggested military training and access to sophisticated planning resources. Captain, I'd say I'm about 80% confident. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental, and the technical skill required for these shots indicates someone with extensive planning capabilities. If I were planning this campaign, Leatherneck would be my ultimate target because of its strategic importance and the propaganda value of successfully attacking it. Morrison folded the map and returned it to the folder, his movements sharp and precise. Elena could see him shifting into operational mode, the careful deliberation of the investigator giving way to the urgency of someone who understood that American lives were at stake. The transformation reminded her of her own mental state during combat deployments, when abstract tactical problems suddenly became life-and-death realities. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, I'm officially requesting your assistance in a classified counter-sniper operation. Your assignment to administrative duties is hereby suspended pending completion of this mission. You'll be working directly with military intelligence to identify, locate, and neutralize the threat posed by this rogue marksman. Elena felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension as she contemplated returning to active duty after months of administrative exile. The prospect of using her skills again was intoxicating, but she also understood that she was being thrown into a situation where failure could result in significant American casualties. The responsibility was enormous, and she would be operating under intense scrutiny from officers who had already demonstrated their willingness to end her career over a single moment of perceived insubordination. Captain Morrison, I accept the assignment. When do we start? Morrison checked his watch and gathered the photographs from Elena's desk, his movements efficient and purposeful. The briefing had taken longer than expected, and Elena could see him mentally adjusting his schedule to accommodate the next phase of the investigation. The urgency in his demeanor suggested that intelligence reports were indicating an imminent escalation in the rogue sniper's campaign. We start immediately. There's a transport leaving for Kandahar in 6 hours, and you'll be on it. Pack light and bring your personal shooting kit if you have one. We may need to engage targets at extreme range, and I want every advantage we can get. Elena nodded, her mind already shifting into deployment mode. She would need to retrieve her custom rifle from storage, check her equipment, and prepare mentally for what could be the most challenging assignment of her military career. The prospect of facing another sniper in direct competition was both terrifying and exhilarating, representing the ultimate test of everything she had learned about long-range shooting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Captain, one more question. Do we have any intelligence about the shooter's identity or background? Morrison paused at the door of the armory, his expression grim. Elena could see him weighing how much information to share, balancing operational security against her need to understand what she was walking into. The hesitation suggested that there were aspects of the investigation that were more sensitive than he had initially indicated. Staff Sergeant, we have some leads but nothing definitive. What I can tell you is that our preliminary investigation suggests the shooter may have connections to American Special Operations Forces. That information is strictly classified and cannot be discussed outside of official briefings. Elena felt a chill run down her spine as the full implications of Morrison's words sank in. If the rogue sniper was connected to American Special Operations, it meant that someone with access to the most sensitive military training and intelligence had turned against their own country. The betrayal would be devastating not just tactically but also psychologically, undermining trust within the Special Operations community and potentially compromising ongoing operations throughout the region. As Morrison left the armory, Elena sat alone among the weapons that had defined her career, contemplating the magnitude of what she was about to undertake. 6 months ago, she had been relegated to filing paperwork as punishment for questioning orders. Now she was being asked to track down and potentially kill a rogue American sniper who possessed skills comparable to her own. The irony of the situation would have been amusing if the stakes weren't so deadly serious. She stood up from her desk and walked to the weapons rack, running her hand along the stock of an M24 sniper rifle. The familiar weight and balance of the weapon brought back memories of successful missions, of targets eliminated at distances that seemed impossible to anyone without specialized training. But this time would be different. This time, she wouldn't just be engaging enemy combatants who had chosen to fight against American forces. This time, she might be forced to kill someone who had once worn the same uniform and taken the same oath that had defined her own military service. The complexity of the emotional burden was staggering, but Elena pushed those concerns aside as she began preparing for deployment. Every component had been selected and modified to provide maximum accuracy at extreme range, turning the rifle into an extension of Elena's own capabilities. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the base's chief armorer, watched her work with the appreciation of someone who understood the complexity of what she was assembling. The rifle represented years of experience and refinement, each modification the result of lessons learned during actual combat deployments. It was a tool designed for one purpose: eliminating targets at distances where most marksmen couldn't even see their objectives. "Staff Sergeant, that's a beautiful piece of equipment," Rodriguez said, admiring the precision machining of the rifle's action. "I heard you were going back into the field. Must be something important if they're pulling you off desk duty." Elena continued her assembly process, checking each component for proper alignment and function. The ritual of preparing her equipment was meditative, helping her focus on the technical aspects of the mission, while pushing aside the emotional complications of potentially engaging an American operative. The weapon in her hands represented certainty in an uncertain world, a tool that would perform exactly as designed regardless of the moral complexity of the situation. "Something like that, Sergeant. Can't discuss the details, but I'll need a full combat load of match-grade ammunition and backup equipment. Whatever happens out there, I want to be prepared for anything." Rodriguez nodded and began gathering the requested supplies, his movements efficient and professional. Elena had worked with him during previous deployments, and she trusted his judgment when it came to selecting equipment for specialized missions. The ammunition he provided would be hand-selected for consistency, each round capable of grouping within a few inches at distances exceeding 1,000 meters. As she finished assembling her rifle, Elena's secure phone rang with a call from Captain Morrison. His voice carried the tension of someone operating under extreme time pressure, and she could hear the background noise of a busy operations center through the connection. Something had changed in the 3 hours since their initial briefing, and Elena suspected it wasn't good news. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez, we've had a development in the situation. Intelligence reports indicate possible sniper activity near Camp Leatherneck within the next 48 hours. Your transport has been moved up, and you'll be departing in 2 hours instead of 5. Are you prepared for immediate deployment?" Elena looked at her assembled rifle and the gear Master Sergeant Rodriguez had prepared, mentally calculating what else she would need for an accelerated deployment timeline. The shortened preparation period was concerning, but she had operated under similar constraints during previous missions. The key was maintaining focus on essential items, while avoiding the temptation to overpack equipment that might slow her down in the field. "Captain Morrison, I can be ready in 90 minutes. Do we have any additional intelligence about the threat?" Morrison's pause before answering told Elena that there were developments he couldn't discuss over an unsecured phone line. The operational security implications suggested that the situation had escalated significantly, probably involving classified intelligence sources or methods that required careful handling. She would have to wait until she reached the operational area to receive a complete briefing. "Staff Sergeant, we'll cover the details during your in-flight briefing. For now, just focus on getting ready for deployment. This mission has been classified at the highest levels, and you'll be working with a specialized task force that's been assembled specifically to address this threat." Elena ended the call and turned to Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been listening to her side of the conversation with growing concern. The armorer had been in the military long enough to recognize the signs of a rapidly developing crisis, and he understood that Elena was being thrust into a situation where her specialized skills might be the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "Staff Sergeant, whatever you're walking into, make sure you come back in one piece. That rifle is a work of art, but it's useless without someone who knows how to use it properly." Elena secured her equipment in a hard case designed to protect precision instruments during military transport, each component nested in custom foam to prevent damage during the flight to Kandahar. The case represented more than just protective storage. It was a symbol of the trust the military had placed in her abilities and the expectation that she would perform her duties regardless of personal cost or risk. As she prepared to leave the armorer's workshop, Elena took one last look at the familiar surroundings of Fort Harrison. 6 months ago, she had been exiled to administrative duties as punishment for refusing to take a shot that might have resulted in civilian casualties. Now she was being asked to use those same skills to hunt down a rogue American sniper who was threatening the lives of her fellow soldiers. The irony of the situation was not lost on her, but Elena pushed aside philosophical considerations as she focused on the tactical challenges ahead. Someone with exceptional marksmanship abilities was operating against American forces, and her job was to find them and neutralize the threat they represented. Everything else was secondary to that primary mission objective. The transport aircraft that would carry her to Kandahar was already warming up on the tarmac as Elena arrived at the flight line, its engines creating a low rumble that she could feel in her chest. The C-130 Hercules was configured for rapid personnel transport, with minimal amenities but maximum reliability for getting soldiers to where they needed to be under challenging conditions. Captain Morrison was waiting for her at the aircraft, along with 2 other soldiers she didn't recognize. Their uniforms bore no unit insignia or identifying marks, suggesting they were part of the specialized task force Morrison had mentioned during their phone conversation. The operational security measures indicated that this mission was being handled at levels far above normal military hierarchy. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, meet Sergeant First Class Williams and Sergeant Thompson, Morrison said, indicating the 2 soldiers. They'll be providing tactical support and intelligence analysis during the mission. Both have extensive experience in counter-sniper operations and have been briefed on the specific threat we're facing. Elena studied the 2 soldiers, noting their professional demeanor and the careful way they assessed her equipment and appearance. Williams appeared to be in his mid-30s, with the lean build and alert eyes of someone who had spent significant time in combat zones. Thompson was younger, probably late 20s, but carried himself with the confidence of someone who had proven his abilities under fire. "Gentlemen," Elena said, extending her hand to each soldier in turn, "I look forward to working with you. Captain Morrison mentioned that we're dealing with a rogue sniper who may have American training. Do we have any additional intelligence about their background or capabilities?" Williams glanced at Morrison before responding, the brief hesitation indicating that there were aspects of the intelligence briefing that required careful handling. Elena recognized the signs of a compartmentalized operation, where information was shared only on a need-to-know basis, even among team members who would be working closely together. "Staff Sergeant, what we can tell you is that our target has demonstrated exceptional marksmanship abilities and intimate knowledge of American tactical procedures. The threat assessment suggests we're dealing with someone who has been specifically trained in long-range shooting techniques and may have access to classified information about our defensive positions." Elena nodded, understanding that she would receive more detailed briefings once they were airborne and operating in a secure environment. The compartmentalization of intelligence was frustrating but necessary given the sensitive nature of investigating potential American involvement in attacks against military installations. As they boarded the aircraft, Elena secured her equipment and prepared for what would be an 8-hour flight to one of the most dangerous regions in Afghanistan. The mission ahead would test every skill she had developed during her military career, and failure could result in significant American casualties at one of the military's most important strategic installations. The aircraft lifted off from Fort Harrison as the sun was setting, carrying Elena toward a confrontation that would determine whether her exile to administrative duties had been justified punishment or a catastrophic waste of her exceptional abilities. In less than 12 hours, she would find out whether the rogue sniper who had challenged her was prepared for what Elena Vasquez could do when she was properly motivated and equipped. The steady drone of the C-130's engines provided a backdrop for Elena's preparation as she reviewed satellite imagery and intelligence reports during the flight to Kandahar. The specialized task force had access to resources that went far beyond normal military operations, including real-time surveillance data and classified intelligence assessments that painted a disturbing picture of the threat they were facing. The rogue sniper had not only demonstrated exceptional marksmanship abilities, but had also shown sophisticated understanding of American military procedures and defensive positions. Each attack had been timed to maximize psychological impact while minimizing the risk of casualties that might trigger an overwhelming response from American forces. It was the work of someone who understood both the technical and political aspects of asymmetric warfare, As Elena studied the intelligence reports, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was looking at the work of someone she might have trained with or served alongside during her own military career. The level of skill and tactical sophistication indicated formal training in American sniper schools, and the intimate knowledge of defensive procedures suggested someone who had been inside American installations as a trusted member of the team. Captain Morrison joined her in reviewing the intelligence materials, his expression grim as he pointed out patterns that had emerged over the past month of attacks. The rogue sniper was clearly working toward a specific objective: building capabilities and intelligence while systematically testing American responses to precision attacks at extreme range. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, I need to share something with you that wasn't included in your initial briefing, Morrison said, his voice barely audible over the aircraft engines. We have reason to believe that the rogue sniper may be targeting specific individuals rather than just attacking installations randomly. The precision of the shots and the tactical timing suggest that someone is trying to send a message to the American military leadership. Elena felt a chill as she processed the implications of Morrison's revelation. If the attacks were targeted assassinations rather than random harassment, it suggested that someone with access to classified personnel information was directing the operations. The security breach would be far more serious than anyone had initially realized, and the potential for additional attacks would be limited only by the shooter's access to intelligence about American personnel movements. Captain Morrison, do we have any idea who might be targeted or what the message is supposed to be? Morrison pulled out a classified folder marked with security clearances far above Elena's normal access level, his movements careful and deliberate. The information he was about to share represented some of the most sensitive intelligence the military possessed, and Elena understood that she was being trusted with secrets that could have strategic implications for American operations throughout the region. Staff Sergeant, the targets appear to be officers who have been involved in controversial decisions regarding rules of engagement or civilian casualties. The pattern suggests that someone is trying to eliminate military personnel who they believe have acted dishonorably or outside the bounds of acceptable conduct. Elena's blood ran cold as she realized what Morrison was suggesting. The rogue sniper wasn't just attacking American installations randomly. They were conducting a systematic campaign of assassination against officers who had made difficult decisions under combat conditions. It was vigilante justice carried out by someone with the skills to eliminate targets at distances that made conventional security measures irrelevant. Captain, are you telling me that someone is hunting American officers for perceived war crimes? Morrison nodded grimly, his expression reflecting the enormous complexity of the situation they were facing. Investigating potential war crimes while simultaneously hunting down the person trying to execute vigilante justice created moral and legal complications that went far beyond normal military operations. The task force would have to navigate political sensitivities while preventing additional casualties among American personnel. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, that's exactly what I'm telling you. And based on the intelligence we've gathered, you may be on the target list yourself. Elena felt the world tilt around her as Morrison's words sank in. Her own controversial decision to refuse a potentially dangerous shot had been well documented in her military record, and if someone was targeting officers for perceived failures of judgment, she would certainly qualify as a potential victim. The irony of being hunted by someone who might actually agree with her moral stance was not lost on her. Captain Morrison, what specific incident might have put me on a target list? Morrison pulled out a personnel file that Elena recognized as her own service record, marked with classifications and assessments that she had never been allowed to review. The file contained details about her deployment history, including the incident that had led to her reassignment to administrative duties. Seeing her military career reduced to bureaucratic documentation was unsettling, but Elena forced herself to focus on the tactical implications of the information. Staff Sergeant, 6 months ago you refused to take a shot during a firefight in Helmand Province because you believed it might result in civilian casualties. Your commanding officer filed a report stating that your refusal potentially prolonged the engagement and put American lives at risk. That report is now part of your permanent record. Elena remembered the incident clearly, but seeing it described in clinical military language was disturbing. She had been ordered to eliminate a sniper who was positioned near a school building, but her assessment of the situation indicated that civilians were likely present in the area. Her refusal to take the shot had been based on rules of engagement that were supposed to protect innocent lives, but her commanding officer had interpreted it as cowardice or insubordination. Captain, if someone is targeting officers for controversial decisions, That incident would certainly qualify, but I need to ask a direct question. Do you believe the rogue sniper is specifically hunting me? Morrison's hesitation before answering told Elena everything she needed to know. The intelligence community had identified her as a potential target, which meant that this mission was not just about protecting American installations, but also about protecting her from someone who might see her as a symbol of everything wrong with American military decision-making. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, we believe there's a significant probability that you're being targeted. The text message you received with coordinates was likely an attempt to lure you into a predetermined kill zone where the rogue sniper could engage you on their terms. This entire mission may be as much about protecting you as it is about neutralizing the threat. Elena processed this information with the analytical mindset that had served her throughout her military career, but she couldn't ignore the emotional impact of learning that someone wanted her dead badly enough to orchestrate an elaborate campaign of psychological warfare. The knowledge that she was being hunted by someone with comparable skills was both terrifying and infuriating. Captain Morrison, if I'm a target, then my involvement in this mission puts everyone else at risk. Maybe I should be removed from the operation for the safety of the team. Morrison shook his head firmly, his expression indicating that Elena's removal from the mission was not an option. The specialized task force needed her expertise to understand the technical aspects of long-range shooting, and her potential value as bait might be the key to drawing the rogue sniper into a confrontation where they could be neutralized. Staff Sergeant, your expertise is essential to this mission, and your status as a potential target might actually work in our favor. If the rogue sniper is specifically hunting you, we can use that knowledge to predict their movements and possibly draw them into an engagement on our terms rather than theirs. Elena understood the tactical logic of Morrison's reasoning, but she also recognized that she was being asked to serve as live bait in a trap that might not work. The rogue sniper had demonstrated exceptional planning abilities and intimate knowledge of American tactics, which suggested they would not be easily deceived by conventional counter-sniper techniques. As the C-130 began its descent toward Kandahar airfield, Elena prepared fair. As the C-130 began its descent toward Kandahar airfield, Elena prepared her mind for what might be the most dangerous assignment of her military career. The knowledge that she was potentially being hunted by a rogue sniper added a personal dimension to the mission that went beyond professional duty, transforming her from hunter to prey in a deadly game where the stakes were measured in American lives. The aircraft touched down at Kandahar with the characteristic thump and screech of military transport, immediately taxiing toward a section of the airfield reserved for classified operations. Elena could see through the small windows that they were being directed to a hangar complex, surrounded by additional security measures that went far beyond normal base protection protocols. The specialized task force was operating under security classifications that required complete isolation from routine military operations. Captain Morrison gathered the team's equipment as the aircraft's engines wound down, his movements sharp and focused in the way that indicated immediate operational tempo. The 8-hour flight had provided time for detailed planning, but Elena knew that their real work would begin the moment they stepped off the aircraft and into the complex security environment of one of Afghanistan's most critical military installations. Sergeant First Class Williams approached Elena as she secured her rifle case, his expression serious but not unfriendly. The tactical support specialist had spent the flight reviewing intelligence reports, and Elena could see that he had developed professional respect for the challenge they were facing. The rogue sniper represented a threat unlike anything most military personnel had encountered during their careers. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, I've been analyzing the ballistics data from the previous attacks, and I need to tell you that we're dealing with someone who's operating at a level that most people would consider impossible. The consistency of the shot placement and the environmental calculations required for these distances suggest someone with capabilities that match or exceed your own. The pre-dawn darkness provided excellent concealment as Elena made her way toward the elevated position she had identified as most likely for the rogue sniper's attack. Her movement through the mountainous terrain required careful attention to noise discipline and visual concealment, as she had to assume that her opponent might have established surveillance of the approach routes to their intended shooting position. The weight of her custom rifle and supporting equipment was familiar and reassuring, but Elena was acutely aware that she was carrying tools that might be used to kill someone who had once taken the same oath of service that had defined her own military career. The moral complexity of the situation was staggering, but she pushed those concerns aside as she focused on the immediate tactical requirements of reaching her position undetected. As she climbed toward the ridge that offered optimal sightlines into Camp Leatherneck, Elena's mind was calculating distances, wind conditions, and sightline angles that would be critical to the success of her mission. The mathematics of long-range shooting were second nature to her, but she knew that her opponent possessed similar capabilities and would be making identical calculations from their own position. The eastern horizon was beginning to show the first faint light of dawn as Elena reached her chosen position and began the process of establishing a concealed shooting platform. The location provided excellent visibility of the approaches to Camp Leatherneck, while offering multiple concealment options and escape routes if withdrawal became necessary. It was exactly the kind of position she would have chosen for her own attack, which made her confident that the rogue sniper would find it equally attractive. Elena's communication equipment crackled softly with check-in reports from Sergeant Williams and Sergeant Thompson, who had reached their assigned overwatch positions and were prepared to provide supporting fire if the engagement escalated beyond her individual capabilities. The specialized task force was in position and ready to execute the ambush that could end the threat posed by the rogue sniper. As she settled into her shooting position and began the methodical process of range estimation and environmental assessment, Elena felt the familiar calm that always preceded engagement with hostile targets. Her mind was clear and focused, processing the technical requirements of long-range shooting while maintaining situational awareness of potential threats from multiple directions. She was as ready as training and experience could make her for what might be the most important shot of her military career. The morning light gradually revealed the mountainous terrain around Camp Leatherneck, and Elena began systematic observation of the positions where the rogue sniper might establish their own shooting platform. Through her high-powered scope, she could see the detailed layout of potential hiding spots and approach routes that would be available to someone with exceptional fieldcraft abilities. Movement caught her attention at approximately 0630 hours, a subtle disturbance in the natural pattern of shadows and vegetation that indicated human presence in an area that should have been uninhabited. Elena adjusted her scope and focused on the location, her pulse quickening as she realized that someone was indeed establishing a shooting position at the exact location she had predicted for the rogue sniper's attack. Through her scope, Elena could see a figure dressed in military camouflage, methodically preparing what appeared to be a high-powered rifle system for long-range engagement. The individual's movements showed the professional competence of someone with extensive training in sniper tactics, confirming that they were dealing with a highly skilled opponent rather than an opportunistic insurgent. Elena keyed her radio to alert the rest of the specialized task force that the rogue sniper had been located and was preparing for engagement. The moment she had been training for throughout her military career had arrived, and she was about to engage in direct combat with someone whose capabilities might exceed her own. Overwatch 1. This is Sniper 1, Elena whispered into her radio. I have eyes on the target. Individual in military camouflage establishing shooting position at grid, reference 341,275, confirming hostile intent based on weapon configuration and target orientation toward friendly installation. Colonel Martinez's voice came through Elena's earpiece with the calm authority of someone who had commanded critical operations throughout her military career. The specialized task force was prepared to support Elena's engagement, but the final tactical decisions would rest with her as the primary marksman responsible for neutralizing the threat. Sniper 1, this is command. You are authorized to engage the target at your discretion. Take whatever action is necessary to protect American lives and eliminate the threat posed by the rogue sniper. Elena took a deep breath and settled into the shooting position that had become second nature through thousands of hours of training and combat experience. The custom rifle was perfectly zeroed for the range and environmental conditions, and her supporting equipment was configured to provide maximum accuracy for what might be the most important shot she would ever take. Through her scope, Elena could see that the rogue sniper had completed their preparations and was beginning to acquire targets within Camp Leatherneck. The moment for decisive action had arrived, and Elena knew that hesitation could result in American casualties that might have been prevented with immediate engagement. Elena's finger found the trigger of her rifle as she made the final calculations required for a shot at nearly 1,900 meters under challenging wind conditions. The mathematics were complex, but her training had prepared her for exactly this type of engagement. Everything she had learned about long-range shooting, tactical decision-making, and psychological warfare was about to be tested in a confrontation that would determine whether her exceptional abilities were sufficient to defeat an opponent of unknown capabilities. The crosshairs of her scope settled on the rogue sniper's position as Elena prepared to take the shot that could end the threat to American lives and validate her return to active duty after months of administrative exile. In a few seconds, she would discover whether her skills were sufficient to defeat someone who had challenged her directly and might possess capabilities that matched or exceeded her own. Elena began the controlled breathing sequence that preceded engagement of hostile targets, her mind clear and focused on the technical requirements of making an accurate shot under extreme conditions. The rogue sniper was approximately 1,900 meters away, positioned behind cover that provided protection from most angles of attack, but remained vulnerable to someone with Elena's elevated position and exceptional marksmanship abilities. The wind conditions were challenging but manageable, requiring compensation that was well within Elena's capabilities based on her combat experience in similar terrain. Her custom rifle was perfectly suited for this type of engagement, and the match-grade ammunition she was using had been selected specifically for consistency at extreme ranges. As Elena prepared to take the shot, she noticed something through her scope that made her pause. The rogue sniper appeared to be looking directly at her position, as if they were aware of her presence and location. The realization that her opponent might have detected her concealed position was disturbing, but Elena forced herself to maintain focus on the immediate tactical requirements of the engagement. Elena's training had prepared her for the possibility that her target might be aware of her presence, and she understood that hesitation could be fatal in a sniper versus sniper engagement. The rogue sniper's apparent awareness of her position meant that she needed to take her shot immediately, before her opponent could engage her with their own weapon system. Elena's finger applied steady pressure to the trigger as she made the final sight adjustments required for accurate engagement at nearly 1,900 meters. The shot would need to be perfect, as there would be no opportunity for correction if the first round missed its target. Everything depended on her ability to execute the fundamentals of marksmanship under the most challenging conditions possible. The rifle fired with the familiar crack of a high-powered cartridge, and Elena immediately began tracking the bullet's flight through her scope while preparing for potential return fire from her target's position. The specialized task force had trained extensively for sniper versus sniper engagements, but Elena knew that academic preparation was different from the reality of engaging a skilled opponent who was shooting back. Through her scope, Elena saw the impact of her bullet strike exactly where she had aimed, confirming that her range estimation and environmental calculations had been accurate. The rogue sniper's position showed signs of the devastating effect of a precisely placed 338 Lapua Magnum round, delivered with surgical accuracy from nearly 1,900 meters away. Elena maintained observation of the target area while reporting her engagement to the specialized task force, her voice calm and professional, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The successful engagement of the rogue sniper represented a significant tactical victory, but Elena understood that confirmation of the threat's elimination would require physical inspection of the target area. Command: this is Sniper 1. Target engaged at 1,847 meters. Observed a direct hit on target position. Requesting permission to move forward for battle damage assessment and confirmation of threat elimination. Colonel Martinez's response came through Elena's earpiece with evident relief and satisfaction. The successful engagement of the rogue sniper had eliminated an immediate threat to American lives and validated the specialized task force's tactical approach to the complex security challenge they had faced. Sniper 1, excellent work. Maintain overwatch position while tactical team moves forward for confirmation. Do not expose yourself to potential secondary threats until we have secured the area and confirmed neutralization of the primary target. Elena continued observing the rogue sniper's position through her scope, looking for any signs of movement or secondary threats that might indicate additional hostile personnel in the area. The tactical situation remained fluid until physical confirmation could be obtained that the threat had been completely eliminated. Sergeant Williams and Sergeant Thompson moved toward the rogue sniper's position with the careful precision of soldiers advancing on potentially dangerous territory. Elena provided overwatch coverage while they approached, her rifle ready to engage any additional threats that might emerge during their movement through the challenging mountain terrain. The radio crackled with Williams's voice as he reached the rogue sniper's position and began his assessment of the engagement results. Elena waited tensely for confirmation that her shot had achieved the desired effect, and that the threat to American lives had been definitively eliminated. Sniper 1. This is Overwatch 2. Target is neutralized. Single individual, military equipment and identification consistent with American Special Operations background. Recovery of intelligence materials in progress. Elena felt a complex mix of professional satisfaction and personal sadness as she processed Williams's report. The successful engagement had eliminated a significant threat to American lives, but the confirmation that the rogue sniper had been an American service member added a tragic dimension to the mission that would stay with her throughout her military career. Colonel Martinez coordinated the recovery operation while Elena maintained her Overwatch position, ensuring that no additional threats could interfere with the specialized task force's collection of intelligence materials from the rogue sniper's position. The mission had been successfully completed, but Elena understood that the full implications of what they had discovered would require extensive investigation by military intelligence personnel. As the tactical team completed their recovery operations and began withdrawal from the engagement area, Elena prepared to leave the position where she had made what might be the most important shot of her military career. The successful engagement of the rogue sniper had validated her exceptional abilities and demonstrated that her reassignment to administrative duties had been a waste of valuable military assets. Elena's return to Camp Leatherneck was met by Colonel Martinez and Captain Morrison, both of whom understood the significance of what she had accomplished during the morning's operation. The elimination of the rogue sniper threat represented a major tactical victory that had prevented potential casualties among American personnel and restored security to critical military installations throughout the region. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, your performance during this operation has been exemplary, Colonel Martinez said as Elena secured her equipment after the mission. The precision and professionalism you demonstrated under extremely challenging conditions reflects the highest standards of military excellence. Elena felt a sense of professional vindication that was tempered by the knowledge that she had been forced to kill someone who had once served in the same uniform and taken the same oath of military service. The moral complexity of the situation would require time to process, but she understood that her actions had been necessary to protect American lives and maintain security in a dangerous operational environment. Colonel Martinez, I was just doing my job. The threat needed to be eliminated, and I had the training and equipment necessary to accomplish the mission. I'm glad that American lives were protected and that the specialized task force was successful. Captain Morrison approached Elena with intelligence materials that had been recovered from the rogue sniper's position, his expression indicating that the investigation had revealed information that would have significant implications for military security procedures. The rogue sniper's background and motivations were more complex than anyone had initially understood. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, the intelligence materials we recovered indicate that the rogue sniper was Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, a former member of Army Special Operations who was discharged 6 months ago, following a controversial incident involving civilian casualties. His personal effects included detailed plans for attacks on multiple American installations and evidence that he was working alone rather than as part of a larger conspiracy. Elena processed this information with mixed emotions, understanding that Chen's trajectory from decorated soldier to rogue operative represented the kind of moral breakdown that could affect any military personnel exposed to the psychological stresses of combat operations. The tragedy was not just his death, but the circumstances that had led him to turn his exceptional abilities against his own country. Captain Morrison, what was the controversial incident that led to his discharge? Morrison consulted the intelligence materials, his expression indicating that Chen's story was tragically similar to the kind of moral conflicts that affected many combat veterans, struggling with the ethical complexities of modern warfare. Elena recognized that she had more in common with the rogue sniper than she was comfortable acknowledging. Staff Sergeant Chen was discharged after refusing to take a shot that might have resulted in civilian casualties during an operation in Helmand Province. His commanding officer filed a report stating that his refusal endangered American lives and demonstrated unfitness for continued military service. Elena felt a chill as she realized that Chen's story was almost identical to her own experience with refusing controversial orders that might have compromised civilian safety. The primary difference was that Chen's discharge had led him down a path of vigilante justice, while her own administrative punishment had ultimately led to this mission where she could demonstrate her value to American military operations. Captain, are you telling me that Chen was targeting officers who he believed had made decisions that compromised military honor or endangered civilian lives? Morrison nodded grimly, understanding that Elena had identified the psychological motivation that had driven Chen's campaign against American military installations. The rogue sniper had been conducting his own twisted form of quality control, eliminating personnel who he believed had failed to uphold the moral standards of military service. Staff Sergeant Vasquez. That appears to have been his motivation. The intelligence materials include detailed assessments of potential targets, all of whom had been involved in controversial decisions regarding civilian casualties or rules of engagement. You were on his target list because of your own refusal to take a potentially dangerous shot. Elena struggled to process the irony that she had been targeted by someone who might have agreed with her moral stance but had chosen to express his convictions through violence against fellow service members. The tragedy of Chen's story was that his initial ethical instincts had been corrupted by anger and isolation into something that threatened the very values he had originally tried to protect. The Specialized Task Force's return to Kandahar Airfield was accompanied by extensive debriefing sessions designed to capture lessons learned and ensure that similar threats could be identified and neutralized more quickly in the future. Elena's successful engagement of the rogue sniper had provided valuable intelligence about the psychological factors that could lead military personnel to turn their skills against their own country. Colonel Martinez conducted Elena's personal debriefing with the thoroughness of someone who understood that the mission's success had implications that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The Specialized Task Force had demonstrated the effectiveness of using exceptional marksmanship abilities to counter similar threats, establishing precedents that would guide future operations. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, your performance during this operation has exceeded all expectations. The precision shooting you demonstrated under extreme pressure, combined with your analytical abilities and tactical judgment, represents the highest level of military professionalism. I'm recommending you for immediate promotion and assignment to a specialized counter-sniper unit. Elena felt a surge of professional satisfaction at Colonel Martinez's words, but she also understood that her future assignments would likely involve similar, morally complex situations where American-trained personnel had turned their skills against their own country. The psychological toll of such missions would be significant, but she was prepared to accept that burden as part of her service to military values and the protection of American lives. Colonel Martinez, I'm honored by your recommendation and prepared to accept whatever assignments will best serve American military interests. The threat posed by rogue personnel with specialized training is something we need to be prepared to address, and I'm willing to be part of that capability. As Elena prepared for her return to the United States, and what would undoubtedly be a very different kind of military career, she reflected on the lessons learned during her confrontation with Staff Sergeant Chen. The rogue sniper had possessed exceptional abilities that he had ultimately used in service of a twisted moral vision, while Elena had used similar skills to protect American lives and uphold the values that made military service meaningful. The difference between them had not been technical capability or moral conviction, but the choices they had made when faced with institutional pressure and personal disappointment. Elena had accepted administrative punishment and continued serving, while Chen had chosen to wage war against the system he felt had betrayed him. The consequences of those choices had ultimately led them to opposite sides of a rifle scope in the mountains of Afghanistan. Elena's successful engagement of the rogue sniper had validated her exceptional abilities and demonstrated that her administrative exile had been a waste of military resources. More importantly, it had shown that soldiers who maintained their commitment to service despite personal setbacks could make critical contributions to American security in ways that vindicated their moral courage and professional capabilities. The Specialized Task Force's mission had been completed successfully, but Elena understood that similar threats would continue to emerge as long as military personnel were exposed to the psychological stresses of combat operations without adequate support systems. Her future role in identifying and countering such threats would require not just exceptional marksmanship abilities, but also the psychological insight necessary to understand how good soldiers could be driven to make catastrophically bad decisions. As the aircraft carrying her back to the United States lifted off from Kandahar Airfield, Elena looked down at the mountainous terrain where she had proven that her skills remained as sharp as ever despite months of administrative punishment. The successful mission had restored her confidence and demonstrated that her value to American military operations extended far beyond what her critics had been willing to acknowledge. The rogue sniper threat had been eliminated, but Elena knew that her real work was just beginning. The specialized skills that had made her one of the military's most capable marksmen would now be focused on protecting American personnel from threats that could emerge from within their own ranks, requiring constant vigilance and the willingness to take action against people who had once served alongside her. Elena Vasquez was no longer just a sniper who had been relegated to filing paperwork. She was now a specialized operative whose exceptional abilities had been proven under the most challenging conditions possible. The military had learned that underestimating her capabilities was a mistake that could have serious consequences for American security, and she was prepared to ensure that similar mistakes would not be made in the future. The Pentagon briefing room felt different this time as Elena walked through its doors 6 weeks after her return from Afghanistan. Gone was the familiar weight of administrative exile, replaced by the confident stride of someone who had proven her worth under the most demanding circumstances possible. The same fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their harsh illumination across polished surfaces. But Elena no longer felt like an outcast in her own military hierarchy. General Patricia Hawkins stood at the podium, her silver hair pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow managed to convey both military precision and personal authority. Elena had heard of Hawkins by reputation as one of the most respected officers in Special Operations Command, someone who had built her career on identifying and nurturing exceptional talent rather than following conventional promotion patterns. Her presence at this briefing suggested that Elena's success in Afghanistan had attracted attention at the highest levels of military leadership. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Hawkins began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect throughout a distinguished career. "We are here to discuss the establishment of a new capability within Special Operations Command, one that addresses threats we have only recently begun to fully understand." Elena sat in the front row alongside Captain Morrison and Colonel Martinez, both of whom had been instrumental in the successful mission against the rogue sniper. The specialized task force that had operated in Afghanistan was being transformed into a permanent unit, with Elena at its center as the primary tactical asset for engaging threats that conventional military units were not equipped to handle. The threat posed by personnel with specialized military training who have turned against American interests represents a new category of security challenge. General Hawkins continued, clicking to a presentation slide that showed a world map marked with incident locations. Over the past year, we have identified 17 separate cases of former or current military personnel using their training to attack American installations or personnel. Elena studied the map, noting that the incidents were scattered across multiple theaters of operation but showed consistent patterns in terms of tactics and target selection. Someone with access to classified intelligence was coordinating these attacks. Or alternatively, multiple individuals with similar backgrounds were independently reaching the same tactical conclusions about how to effectively strike American military assets. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez," General Hawkins said, directing her attention to Elena. "Your successful engagement of the rogue sniper in Afghanistan demonstrated capabilities that are essential to addressing this emerging threat. Your combination of exceptional marksmanship skills, analytical abilities, and psychological insight makes you uniquely qualified to lead efforts to identify and neutralize similar threats." Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as General Hawkins outlined the scope of what would become her new permanent assignment. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit would be tasked with investigating potential threats, conducting surveillance of suspected personnel, and, when necessary, engaging hostile actors with lethal force to protect American military assets and personnel. "General Hawkins, I understand the importance of this mission and I'm prepared to accept whatever responsibilities you believe are appropriate," Elena responded, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was being proposed. "The threat posed by trained military personnel who have turned against their own country requires specialized capabilities, and I'm honored to be considered for this role." General Hawkins nodded approvingly, her expression indicating that Elena's response had confirmed her suitability for the challenging assignment ahead. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit would operate with broad authority and significant resources, but would also face scrutiny from multiple oversight agencies concerned about the potential for abuse of such capabilities. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez, effective immediately, you are promoted to the rank of Sergeant First Class and assigned as the primary tactical operator for the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit. You will report directly to Colonel Martinez and will have access to all intelligence resources necessary to identify and neutralize threats posed by rogue military personnel." Elena stood and accepted the promotion certificate and new insignia that represented her transformation from administrative exile to specialized operative. The journey from filing paperwork to commanding a unit dedicated to protecting American military personnel had taken less than 2 months, but Elena understood that her real work was just beginning. Colonel Martinez approached the podium to brief the assembled officers on the operational structure and initial missions that had been identified for the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit. Elena could see from the intelligence materials being distributed that they would be dealing with threats that were more complex and dangerous than the single rogue sniper she had engaged in Afghanistan. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit will initially focus on 3 primary threats that have been identified through ongoing intelligence operations, Colonel Martinez began, pointing to photographs of individuals who appeared to be current or former military personnel. Each of these cases represents a different category of threat, requiring specialized approaches and tactical capabilities. Elena studied the photographs, noting that all 3 individuals appeared to be in their 30s or 40s, with military bearing that suggested extensive combat experience. Their backgrounds would likely include specialized training that made them dangerous opponents, and their motivations for turning against American interests would need to be understood before effective countermeasures could be developed. The first case involves former Marine Scout sniper David Kellerman, who disappeared from a Veterans Administration facility 6 months ago and is believed to be responsible for attacks on military recruiting stations in 3 different states, Colonel Martinez continued. Kellerman was discharged following psychological evaluation that determined he was unfit for continued service due to post-traumatic stress related to civilian casualties during his deployment in Iraq. Elena recognized the pattern immediately, understanding that Kellerman's case was similar to Staff Sergeant Chen's trajectory from decorated soldier to dangerous adversary. The psychological trauma associated with controversial combat decisions was creating a subset of veterans who channeled their pain and anger into violence against the military establishment they held responsible for their suffering. The second case is more complex, Colonel Martinez continued, clicking to a new photograph. Former Army Special Forces operator Lisa Chang has been identified as the leader of a group calling itself the Military Justice Coalition, which claims to be dedicated to exposing war crimes and holding military leadership accountable for illegal actions. Elena felt a chill as she processed the implications of Chang's case. A coordinated group of rogue military personnel represented a far more serious threat than individual operators acting alone, especially if they had access to classified intelligence and sophisticated equipment. The Military Justice Coalition could potentially launch coordinated attacks that would overwhelm conventional security measures. What evidence do we have about the Military Justice Coalition's capabilities and intentions? Elena asked, recognizing that understanding the group's resources and objectives would be critical to developing effective countermeasures. Colonel Martinez pulled out additional intelligence materials that showed surveillance photographs and intercepted communications from suspected members of the Military Justice Coalition. Elena could see that the organization had attracted former military personnel from multiple branches of service, all united by grievances against military leadership and a willingness to use violence to advance their agenda. Intelligence suggests that the Military Justice Coalition has approximately 25 active members, all with specialized military training and access to sophisticated equipment, Colonel Martinez replied. They have been linked to cyber attacks on military databases, theft of classified documents, and surveillance of high-ranking military officers who they consider to be war criminals. Elena understood that engaging a coordinated group of rogue military personnel would require resources and tactics that went far beyond individual sniper operations. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit would need to develop capabilities for infiltration, surveillance, and coordinated tactical operations against opponents who possessed training and equipment comparable to their own. Colonel Martinez, what's the third case you mentioned? Martinez's expression grew more serious as he clicked to the final photograph, showing a man in his late 40s whose military bearing and confident expression suggested someone accustomed to command authority. Elena could see from his posture and equipment that this individual represented a different category of threat entirely. The third case involves Colonel James Fletcher, who is currently assigned to the Pentagon but is suspected of providing classified intelligence to foreign governments. Colonel Martinez explained. Fletcher has access to some of our most sensitive military planning documents, and intelligence suggests that he may be coordinating with hostile foreign services to compromise American military operations worldwide. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she realized that Fletcher represented the most dangerous type of threat the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit would face. A serving officer with access to classified intelligence who was actively working to undermine American military operations could cause damage that would dwarf anything achieved by individual rogue operators or small groups of disgruntled veterans. Colonel Martinez, how do we investigate a serving officer without alerting him to our suspicions and potentially compromising ongoing intelligence operations? Martinez nodded approvingly at Elena's question, recognizing that she had identified the central challenge in investigating potential traitors who remained embedded within the military hierarchy. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit would need to develop sophisticated surveillance and investigation capabilities that could operate without detection by their targets. Sergeant First Class Vasquez, that's exactly the kind of tactical thinking that makes you essential to this unit's success. Investigating Colonel Fletcher will require coordination with multiple intelligence agencies and the development of surveillance techniques that can penetrate the highest levels of military security without compromising ongoing operations. General Hawkins returned to the podium as Colonel Martinez concluded his briefing on the initial cases that would define the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit's mission parameters. Elena could see that the general was preparing to outline the broader strategic context that made the unit's work essential to American national security interests. Sergeant First Class Vasquez, the threats we have discussed represent just the visible portion of a much larger problem, General Hawkins said, her tone indicating that the full scope of the challenge was even more serious than what had been presented during the briefing. Intelligence assessments suggest that hostile foreign governments are actively recruiting disgruntled American military personnel, offering them financial incentives and ideological support to turn their specialized skills against their own country. Elena processed this information with growing concern, understanding that foreign intelligence services had identified American military training and equipment as potential weapons that could be turned against American interests. The psychological vulnerabilities created by combat trauma and institutional disappointments were being exploited by sophisticated adversaries who understood how to convert American assets into American threats. General Hawkins, are you saying that cases like Staff Sergeant Chen and the Military Justice Coalition might be part of coordinated foreign intelligence operations rather than isolated incidents of domestic terrorism? General Hawkins nodded grimly, her expression indicating that Elena had identified exactly the kind of strategic thinking that would be required to effectively counter the threats facing American military operations. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit would need to investigate not just individual cases, but also the broader networks and support systems that enabled rogue military personnel to operate effectively against their former colleagues. Sergeant First Class Vasquez, that's precisely what our intelligence assessments suggest. The pattern of attacks and the sophistication of the operations indicate coordination and support that goes beyond what individual operators or small groups could achieve independently. We believe we're facing a systematic campaign to turn American military capabilities against American interests. Elena felt the full weight of her new assignment settling on her shoulders as she understood that the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit would be fighting a war against enemies who possessed intimate knowledge of American military procedures and capabilities. The psychological and tactical challenges would be unprecedented, requiring constant adaptation and the willingness to engage opponents who understood her own training and limitations. General Hawkins, what resources and authorities will the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit have access to for addressing these threats? General Hawkins pulled out a classified document that Elena recognized as containing authorities and capabilities that were typically reserved for the most sensitive intelligence operations. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit would operate with unprecedented freedom of action, but would also face scrutiny and accountability measures designed to prevent abuse of such extraordinary powers. Sergeant First Class Vasquez, your unit will have access to all intelligence resources within the Department of Defense, coordination authority with civilian intelligence agencies, and authorization to conduct operations both within the United States and in foreign theaters as required by mission parameters, General Hawkins explained. You will also have access to specialized equipment and support personnel that are not available to conventional military units. Elena understood that she was being entrusted with capabilities that could have significant impact on American national security, but she also recognized that the threats they were facing required extraordinary measures. The rogue military personnel who were turning their skills against their own country possessed training and equipment that made them formidable adversaries, and conventional law enforcement or military units were not equipped to engage them effectively. General Hawkins, I understand the authority you're granting and the responsibility that comes with it. I won't hesitate to use these capabilities when necessary to protect American lives and military operations. As the briefing concluded, Elena found herself surrounded by the same Pentagon corridors, where she had once been relegated to administrative duties as punishment for refusing to compromise her moral principles. The transformation from filing clerk to specialized operative had been dramatic, but Elena understood that her real test would come when she faced the complex moral and tactical challenges of engaging fellow Americans who had chosen to turn their military training against their own country. Captain Morrison approached Elena as she prepared to leave the briefing room, his expression reflecting both professional confidence in her abilities and personal concern for the challenges she would face in her new role. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit would operate in moral and legal territory that was largely unexplored, requiring careful navigation of competing loyalties and ethical considerations. Sergeant First Class Vasquez, I want you to know that you'll have my complete support as we build this unit and tackle these cases, Morrison said. The work we're undertaking is essential to American security, but it's also going to test us in ways that conventional military operations never could. Elena nodded, appreciating Morrison's recognition of the psychological challenges that would accompany their mission to investigate and potentially eliminate American military personnel who had turned against their own country. The emotional toll of such operations would be significant, but Elena was prepared to accept that burden as part of her service to the values that made military service meaningful. Captain Morrison, I understand what we're walking into, and I'm prepared for whatever challenges lie ahead. The threats we're facing require specialized capabilities, and I'm committed to developing and employing those capabilities effectively. Elena's first assignment came within hours of the Pentagon briefing, as intelligence analysts identified urgent threats that required immediate attention from the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit. The case involved surveillance of military installations near Washington, D.C., by individuals who appeared to possess detailed knowledge of security procedures and defensive positions. The intelligence briefing took place in a secure facility that Elena had never seen before, despite her years of service at various military installations. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit's headquarters had been established in a location that provided maximum security and operational flexibility, with direct communication links to intelligence agencies throughout the government. Sergeant First Class Vasquez, we have surveillance footage of 3 individuals conducting reconnaissance of Marine Corps Base Quantico, the intelligence analyst began, displaying photographs that showed people with military bearing observing the base from multiple vantage points. The individuals appear to be former military personnel, and their surveillance pattern suggests they're gathering intelligence for a potential attack. Elena studied the photographs, noting the systematic way that the suspects had documented security measures and defensive positions around the base. Their approach showed military training and tactical sophistication, confirming that the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit was dealing with threats that required specialized countermeasures. Do we have identification on any of the suspects? Elena asked, understanding that knowing their backgrounds and motivations would be essential to predicting their next actions and developing effective intervention strategies. The analyst pulled out additional materials that included partial identification of one suspect based on facial recognition analysis of security camera footage. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she saw that the individual had been identified as a former Marine Corps scout sniper with multiple combat deployments and specialized training in reconnaissance and surveillance techniques. The identified suspect is former Staff Sergeant Robert Martinez, who was discharged 18 months ago following an incident involving alleged excessive force during a combat operation in Syria, the analyst continued. Martinez has been linked to several online forums where former military personnel discuss grievances against military leadership and potential actions to address perceived injustices. Elena recognized that Martinez represented exactly the kind of threat that the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit had been created to address, combining exceptional military capabilities with psychological motivations that could drive him to violence against his former colleagues. The surveillance of Marine Corps Base Quantico suggested that he was planning an operation that could result in significant casualties if not intercepted. What's our timeline for intervention? Elena asked, understanding that preventing attacks required careful timing to avoid alerting suspects while ensuring that American lives were protected. The intelligence analyst consulted recent surveillance reports that indicated the suspects' reconnaissance activities were becoming more focused and systematic, suggesting that they were moving toward operational planning rather than preliminary intelligence gathering. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit would need to act quickly to prevent what appeared to be an imminent attack. Based on the pattern of surveillance activities, we estimate that the suspects are preparing for action within the next 72 hours, the analyst replied. We need to initiate interdiction operations immediately to prevent potential casualties at Marine Corps Base Quantico. Elena felt the familiar pre-mission tension that always preceded high-stakes operations, but she also experienced professional satisfaction at being trusted with such a critical assignment. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit's first mission would test their capabilities and establish precedents for how they would address similar threats in the future. I'll need a full tactical briefing on the suspect's capabilities, probable weapons, and potential operational plans, Elena said, slipping into the analytical mindset that had served her throughout her military career. If we're dealing with trained military personnel, we need to assume they've prepared for the possibility of intervention and have contingency plans for dealing with opposition. The tactical briefing revealed that the suspects possessed equipment and training that made them extremely dangerous opponents, including experience with explosives, advanced marksmanship capabilities, and sophisticated communication equipment that would allow coordinated operations. Elena understood that engaging them would require careful planning and overwhelming tactical superiority to prevent casualties among American personnel. Elena's team for the interdiction operation included specialists from multiple military branches, all selected for their experience in engaging highly trained opponents under challenging conditions. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit had access to personnel and equipment that represented the best capabilities available within American military forces. Sergeant First Class Vasquez, intelligence suggests that the suspects are planning to attack during the morning formation at Marine Corps Base Quantico, Colonel Martinez briefed Elena as her team prepared for deployment. The timing would maximize casualties among Marine personnel while providing multiple escape routes through the surrounding terrain. Elena studied aerial photographs of Marine Corps Base Quantico and the surrounding area, identifying potential engagement positions and escape routes that would be available to the suspects. The tactical challenges were significant, but her team had trained extensively for operations against opponents with military backgrounds and specialized capabilities. Colonel Martinez, I recommend that we intercept the suspects before they can establish shooting positions around the base, Elena said, outlining her tactical plan. If we allow them to get into position, we'll be fighting on their terms rather than our own. The interdiction operation launched in the pre-dawn hours, with Elena's team moving through terrain that provided concealment while allowing rapid response to multiple potential engagement areas. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit's first mission would test their ability to operate effectively against opponents who possessed training and equipment comparable to their own. Elena's position provided overwatch coverage of the primary approach route that intelligence analysis had identified as most likely for the suspect's movement toward Marine Corps Base Quantico. Through her scope, she could observe the terrain where former Staff Sergeant Martinez and his associates would need to travel to reach their intended attack positions. Movement in the early morning darkness confirmed that the suspects were proceeding according to the timeline that intelligence analysis had predicted, validating the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit's assessment capabilities and tactical planning. Elena prepared to engage targets that represented a new category of threat to American military operations. Command, this is Sniper 1. Elena reported through her radio as she observed 3 individuals moving with military precision toward positions that would allow engagement of personnel at Marine Corps Base Quantico. I have eyes on 3 suspects moving to establish attack positions, confirming hostile intent based on weapons and tactical movement patterns. Elena's engagement of the suspects demonstrated the effectiveness of the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit's approach to addressing threats posed by rogue military personnel. Her precision shooting eliminated the immediate danger, while her team secured intelligence materials that provided valuable information about broader networks of disgruntled veterans who might pose similar threats. The successful completion of Elena's first mission as leader of the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit established her reputation as someone who could effectively address threats that conventional military and law enforcement agencies were not equipped to handle. Her combination of exceptional marksmanship skills and analytical capabilities made her uniquely valuable for protecting American military personnel from dangers that emerged from within their own ranks. 6 months after her promotion and assignment to lead the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit, Elena stood once again in a Pentagon briefing room, this time addressing senior military leadership about the progress her team had made in identifying and neutralizing threats posed by rogue military personnel. The unit's success rate had exceeded all expectations, eliminating 17 separate threats, while providing valuable intelligence about foreign efforts to recruit disgruntled American veterans. General Hawkins, the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit has successfully addressed every case that has been assigned to us, Elena reported, displaying statistics that showed the unit's effectiveness in protecting American military installations and personnel. We have identified patterns in foreign recruitment efforts and developed countermeasures that are preventing hostile intelligence services from exploiting American military personnel. General Hawkins nodded approvingly, her expression indicating satisfaction with Elena's performance and the broader success of the Counter-Rogue Operations Unit in addressing threats that had previously gone undetected or unaddressed by existing military and intelligence capabilities. Sergeant First Class Vasquez, your unit's success has exceeded our most optimistic projections, General Hawkins said. The specialized capabilities you have developed are now being requested by commanders throughout the Department of Defense, and we are prepared to expand your operations to address emerging threats in multiple theaters. Elena felt professional satisfaction at the recognition of her unit's success, but she also understood that their effectiveness had created demand for capabilities that would require significant expansion of resources and personnel. The Counter-Rogue Operations Unit had proven that threats posed by rogue military personnel could be effectively addressed, but the scope of the problem was larger than anyone had initially realized. General Hawkins, I'm prepared to accept whatever expansion of responsibilities you believe is appropriate, but I need to emphasize that maintaining operational effectiveness will require careful selection of personnel and continued access to specialized resources. Elena's transformation from administrative exile to specialized operative had been completed, but she understood that her real contribution to American military security was just beginning. The threats posed by rogue military personnel would continue to evolve, requiring constant adaptation and the willingness to engage opponents who possessed intimate knowledge of American military capabilities and procedures. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.